The movie begins with a middle-aged man named Bob who works at a mill factory in a small town. He lives by himself, and aside from his job, he doesn't have much else happening in his life. Elsewhere, we see his teenage daughter Eva, who lives in another town with her mother Darlene and stepmother Molly. There seems to be friction in the family, as Eva feels distant from her mothers. Whenever they try to talk to her, she ignores them and spends most of her time with her friends. In the next scene, Bob returns home after a long day at work and receives a call from Darlene. She tells him that she's worried for Eva, who acts very rebellious and doesn't listen to her. Bob mentions that he sends them monthly money and doesn't understand what more she wants. She claims she just wants him to be there for their daughter. She then accuses him of abandoning them 8 years ago without any explanation, but he says he's too tired and hangs up. Afterwards, he sits on the couch and removes his bandages, revealing his disintegrated hands. It turns out that he is suffering from a mysterious disease that causes his body to slowly become invisible. Later, Bob goes to a bar for a drink where a waitress tries to flirt with him, but he ignores her. Outside, he meets a guy named Nelson, who is his weed supplier. Bob becomes irritated when he discovers that the prices have doubled this time, but Nelson informs him that it's his boss, Crispy's, decision and not his. So, before leaving, Bob curses at Crispy and asks Nelson to pass on the message. The following day, Bob is at work as usual, but he begins to replay Darlene's words in his mind. He eventually can't bear the weight of his thoughts and quits his work on the spot. That evening, he packs his things and drives off in his truck to see his daughter, whom he has not seen in a long time. But on the way, Bob begins to feel a lot of pain, which leads to an accident. Since he doesn't have many friends, he calls Nelson, asking him to come quickly for help. As far as I know, weed dealers don't do that. He then goes to a nearby cafe where people are shocked by his terrible state. Bob directly heads to the restroom and checks out his injuries. As he lifts his shirt, we see that his disease has grown worse and his ribs are now visible. After composing himself, he walks out and sits at a table. Moments later, Crispy arrives and sits with him, claiming that Nelson was unable to come. After a brief conversation, the two walk outside, and Crispy orders his men to pick up Bob's ravaged truck. He then asks where he's going, and Bob replies that he is heading south. Hearing this, Crispy offers to help him, but he has his own conditions. He states that he wants Bob to deliver some drugs to his customers in exchange for fixing his truck. After careful consideration, Bob agrees to take on the job. The next morning, Crispy shoots a bear and takes out its heart. He then places some drugs inside it and puts them in an icebox. Afterward, he hands the box to Bob, who then sets off on his journey. That evening, he arrives at Darlene's home, where she greets him happily and claims that Eva is at a friend's house. She says Molly is also not home and invites him to stay. Although he is hesitant at first, he finally agrees to stay for the night. The following morning, Bob wakes up and prepares to deliver the drug package. At that moment, Eva comes home and is surprised to see her father after 8 years. She asks why he's here, and he explains that her mother called him. Bob then says that he needs to go somewhere for work, and she asks if she can come along. However, he refuses and departs alone. Later, Bob arrives at a factory and meets a man named Milton. Another guy tries to check his body, but Bob feels pain and claims that his ribs are injured. After a brief conversation, he hands Milton the drugs and accepts some money. The latter also provides him with some Chinese medication, claiming that it will heal his ribs. When Bob returns home, he comes across Eva and apologizes for not taking her earlier. She then begins to ask about her grandfather and what happened to him. Bob explains that he had bipolar disorder and eventually committed the unthinkable out of frustration. Hearing this, Eva is left completely speechless. He then asks if they can hang out later, and she nervously replies with a yes. Afterward, Eva goes into a Chinese medicine shop, and a saleswoman approaches her, asking what she needs. The teenager doesn't say anything, so the woman claims that they also have a doctor who can check on her. Eva becomes nervous and tries to leave, but the woman offers her some medicine for free, saying it is beneficial to her health. Later, Eva meets up with her friends, and they make plans to explore an old building that used to be a mental hospital. Her best friend Amelia is initially hesitant and refuses to go, but Eva eventually convinces her, assuring her that it will be fun. Upon reaching the facility, Eva discloses that her grandfather had stayed here and eventually committed the unthinkable. The group then proceeds to the basement, talking talking about how this place is supposed to be haunted. Just then, they spot a mysterious figure hiding under a white cloth. This causes the teenagers to panic in fear, but moments later, the person is gone, leaving only the white cloth behind. At that moment, Amelia grabs Eva's hand and notices her bones sticking out without any muscle. It turns out that Eva also has her father's disease, which she has kept hidden from everyone. This terrifies Amelia, and she begins to argue with her friend. But before the matter can escalate, some guards arrive there, forcing the teenagers to run away. That night, Bob stays at Darlene's house again, where the two reminisce about the old days. They also chat about the day they met and fell in love. The next morning, however, they are horrified to learn that Eva didn't return home all night. Bob then rushes to her room where he finds her phone. After reviewing her text messages, he realizes that she was planning to go somewhere with her friends. So, he and Darlene quickly go to Amelia's house, where her father opens the door and informs her that Eva is not there. Frustrated, Bob approaches Eva's male friends and asks about her whereabouts. They initially try to play it off, but when he becomes aggressive, they finally admit that they all went to the mental hospital. However, they claim that they eventually left the facility and went their separate ways. In the next scene, Bob and Darlene reach the mental hospital in search of their daughter. When the guards try to stop him, he becomes violent and causes a ruckus. As a result, they shoot him with a taser, knocking him unconscious. Darlene pleads with the hospital chief to release him, but she refuses due to his violent behavior and claims he can hurt anyone. Later on, the hospital chief speaks with Bob and reveals that she is aware of his invisibility illness. She discloses that his father also had this strange illness before passing away. She tries to convince him to stay at the hospital, asserting that they can provide care for him. However, he accuses her of conducting experiments on his father and pushing him to the point of death. After their conversation, a staff member confiscates all of Bob's belongings and confines him in a room. Around midnight, Bob is awakened by someone, and he discovers that his door is unexpectedly open and his belongings are also in the room. This confuses him, and he wonders who's trying to help him. Regardless, he doesn't want to miss the chance, so he makes a run for it. By the time Bob reaches home, he is in agonizing pain and can't even walk properly. He sees a message on Eva's phone from Amelia's number, urging her to come back. Realizing that her friend might have information on her whereabouts, he immediately goes to visit Amelia. The latter then finally explains about what happened at the mental hospital. She mentions that Eva also has the same strange disease as him, and that she was searching for a cure. Amelia then pleads with him to find her soon and hands him the bag Eva left behind. Later, Bob examines the bag and discovers the same Chinese medicine in it. Meanwhile, Eva is undergoing an operation conducted by a mysterious group, and her skin condition looks like her father's. Soon, Bob meets Milton and asks where he got the Chinese medicine, as he found the same stuff in his daughter's bag. When Milton hands him the store's address, our hero rushes towards it. At the store, Bob approaches the saleswoman with a picture of Eva, demanding to know her whereabouts. She claims she doesn't know, but he notices Eva's bicycle in front of the store and becomes hostile. When she still doesn't answer, he removes his cap and shows his head, which is mostly disintegrated. Seeing this, the saleswoman becomes afraid and tells him that he is a legend. She then finally reveals that the doctor has taken Eva for a checkup, but he shouldn't be worried because he is a very good doctor. After this, Bob removes most of his clothes and, despite his fragile condition, heads towards the basement. There, he discovers several people experimenting with drugs. Bob also finds Eva, who is imprisoned in a cage. It turns out she is being held here and subjected to experiments and abuse. Bob observes that her shoulders are being torn and becomes angry. When the evil doctor shows up, he attacks and nearly kills him, but Eva stops him from taking it further. The two then leave the store, and Bob's condition begins to worsen. When they arrive home, Eva's mothers become very emotional after finally seeing her safe. Inside, Darlene tends to his wounds, and Bob finally reveals about his illness and why he left them 8 years ago. He explains that his father also had the same illness, which affects their offspring, including Eva. The next day, Bob wants to return home, but due to his fragile condition, Eva decides to go with him. After saying goodbye to the mothers, the two embark on their journey. Upon returning to the town, Bob meets with Nelson and gives him a package, asking him to give it to his boss. But that evening, when Crisby opens the package, he becomes furious to find only nails and screws instead of money. In the following days, Eva takes great care of her father, but soon his condition worsens and most of his body parts begin to fade away. One night, she catches him leaving the house and asks where he's going. Bob informs her that he cannot live like this and wants to end it all. This devastates the teenager, but he reveals that before she arrived, he had had planned to go to the mill and make himself disappear. Despite her pleas to stop him, he refuses to listen and eventually leaves. How to Traumatize Your Daughter 101. The next morning, we see a depressed Eva crying alone in the house. Moments later, someone knocks on the door and she believes it is her father. However, it turns out to be Crisby. He is furious with Bob for not returning his money and demands to know where he is. Eva claims she has no idea and that she purchased the house from him, but he notices her childhood photograph and realizes that she is Bob's daughter. Crisby then begins touching her inappropriately and claims that he will make a profit from her. Suddenly, at that moment, he is knocked off by some invisible force, and Eva realizes that her father is still alive. Bob then chokes Crisby and eventually finishes him off. After the ordeal, Eva notices blood on the floor and asks her father if he's bleeding. However, he claims that he's fine. He explains that he couldn't bring himself to end his life and leave her all alone. The two then have an emotional reunion and promise to always be by each other's side. The next morning, Crisby's lifeless body is seen lying in the snow. A cheeky bear soon approaches him and starts feeding on his corpse. Later, Eva is in a supermarket doing some grocery shopping. She then gets into the car and talks with her invisible father. Bob shares that he spent his life resenting his father for ending his life and abandoning him, but he now believes that his father is still alive. This confuses Eva, and he clarifies that he thinks the mysterious person who helped him escape the hospital that day was his father. The most invisible thing in this movie was the point of it all.